So, welcome to the deep dive. I want you to imagine something for a second. What if this soul, the thing we always talk about, isn't actually what you are?
Right. What if it's not the core of your identity at all?
Exactly. What if, instead of being your ultimate eternal self, the soul is just uh, a temporary piece of technology, like a highly specialized spacesuit?
A spacesuit is a great way to put it.
Yeah, or like a universal translator designed specifically to help your pure spirit survive the sheer heaviness of being in a physical human body.
It's a concept that completely upends how we traditionally view our inner lives. I mean, for centuries, we've treated the soul as this abstract, mystical essence,
Oh,
really.
absolutely. The eternal you.
But the philosophical text we are exploring today redefines it as a highly functional, temporary mechanism of adaptation. And the implications of that shift are just staggering.
Because if it's just a mechanism, then preparing for what happens to that technology after you die, well, it fundamentally changes how you live and what you attach your identity to right now.
Exactly. It changes everything.
And I have to say, the sources you brought in for this deep dive are intensely profound. They revolve around some truly striking visual metaphors.
They do, yeah. The imagery is very specific.
Like in your notes, there's this recurring image of a scarab beetle. Sometimes it's depicted as radiant glowing yellow,
Right.
but other times it's this brilliant translucent blue glass structure. And it has the letters CIP etched below it. And it's physically lifting a luminous glowing sphere up into the light.
That scarab imagery is absolutely vital. We're going to use that specific visual today to decode the mechanics of life, death, and consciousness.
It's such a cool image. So where do we start with it?
Well, it represents the heavy lifting required to exist in this universe. To understand what happens when we eventually leave this physical reality, we first have to understand the fundamental friction of being alive in it.
Okay, the friction.
Right. And according to the text, that friction begins with a massive, insurmountable language barrier.
Yeah, I saw that in the notes and I was a bit confused. I don't think it means a language barrier like, someone speaking English versus Italian, right?
No, not at all.
The text claims there is a total difference between the mind and the spirit, and it's rooted in quote-unquote language. So how are we actually defining language here?
We have to pull the camera way back for this. The human grammar that you and I are using right now, the actual words firing in our listeners' brains as they process this audio, is a biological phenomenon.
Like a historical one.
Exactly. It is the result of thousands of years of evolutionary elaboration. It started as animal verbal signals and slowly morphed into complex mental architectures filled with historical and symbolic meanings.
So it belongs entirely to the physical earthly realm.
100%. It is purely an earthly tool.
Wait, so when I'm thinking a sentence in my head, like
Yeah.
debating what to have for lunch or stressing about a work email, that internal monologue isn't my spirit talking.
Not even a little bit. That is your mind. And your mind operates entirely on human grammar. The spirit, however, possesses a purely qualitative nature. It does not use syntax or vocabulary or earthly symbols. Its language is built entirely on a totally different energetic reality.
So it doesn't think in English or Italian or whatever.
Right. The text makes a strict cosmological distinction here. The physical universe, which includes your brain and your mental communication, operates on quantitative energy. The spirit operates on qualitative energy.
Wait, before we go further, we really need to translate those terms for the listener. I mean, I hear quantitative and qualitative in corporate marketing meetings, but what do they mean cosmologically?
Sure, think of quantitative energy as anything that can be measured, divided, or mechanically constructed. Gravity, time, atoms, brain chemistry.
The physical decay of cells.
Yes, all of that. That is all quantitative. It's mechanical. Qualitative energy, on the other hand, is the realm of meaning, intention, and pure awareness. It is a pure state of being.
Okay, let me try to picture this. If the spirit is purely qualitative, dropping it into a physical, quantitative human body is, well, it's like taking a seasoned traveler and dropping them into a completely foreign country.
That's a good way to look at it.
But it's not just that you don't know the local words, it's that you don't even have a physical mouth to speak them. Like, the physics of the place, the unspoken rules, the gravity itself are entirely alien to your nature.
I'd take that traveler analogy a step further to really grasp the friction. You don't just lack a mouth. The atmospheric pressure in this foreign country is like 10 times heavier than your home world.
Oh, wow. So just existing is hard.
Exactly. Every single movement takes monumental effort. That density is what cosmological quantity feels like to a pure spirit. It's a pure energy form trying to engage with a dense, mechanically constructed environment.
If the environments are that incompatible, I mean, if the physical body only speaks quantity and the spirit only speaks quality, how does the spirit not just get crushed?
Or remain entirely paralyzed, right?
Yeah, information has to pass between them somehow without completely destroying the spirit.
And that absolute necessity for a bridge is where this material completely redefines our existence. The spirit needs a filter, it needs a mediator.
And that mediator is the soul.
Yes, the soul is the transducer.
The text explicitly calls the soul a transducer, which is interesting. I know a microphone is a transducer because it takes, acoustic sound waves in the air and converts them into electrical signals so a computer can record them.
Exactly. It translates one form of energy into a completely different form.
Is that literally what the soul is doing here?
That is the exact mechanism. When the pure spirit incarnates, it must adapt its spiritual self-perception to the human mind's perception. The soul is that active point of translation.
And does it work both ways?
It works simultaneously in both directions. The spirit sends qualitative signals down into the mind, and the earthly environment sends heavy quantitative signals back up.
So it's constantly translating back and forth.
Yes. And this constant grinding exchange and adaptation between the two, that continuous friction, is the very thing that constitutes the soul.
I want to bring back the image of the scarab from the sources here, specifically the one made of translucent blue glass holding up the brilliant sphere. How does that visual explain this transducer mechanism?
Well, look at how glass physically behaves. If you have chaotic, scattered sunlight hitting a specially shaped piece of glass, the glass captures that raw energy, filters out certain wavelengths, and focuses it into a concentrated beam.
Right, like a magnifying glass.
Exactly. Now, the raw quantitative data of Earth, a physical injury, a biological rush of joy, the stress of a failing career, is chaotic and dense. The pure spirit cannot process a career failure because a career is just a quantitative human construct.
It doesn't understand the concept of a 401k or a promotion.
Exactly. But the glass scarab, the soul, captures that heavy earthly experience and translates the raw data into an evolutionary lesson like resilience or humility.
Oh, I see. It focuses the earthly noise into pure spiritual light that the spirit can actually absorb.
Exactly. It's a translation of raw data into pure meaning.
That makes the mechanism incredibly clear. But I have to push back a little on behalf of anyone listening right now.
Sure, go ahead.
If the soul is just a temporary glass shell or, just a biological microphone we speak into for 80 years, doesn't that inherently diminish the value of our human personality?
It's a common concern.
Like, are we just a vast data mining operation for the spirit, making our actual human lives kind of meaningless?
It is entirely natural to feel that initial resistance to the concept. However, the text frames this not as a diminishing of the human experience, but as the ultimate elevation of it.
Elevation, how so?
Well, the spirit exists in pure quality, which is beautiful but static. To evolve, to actually grow, it desperately needs friction. It needs to recognize the difference between itself and the dense physical universe.
So it needs the contrast of the earthly realm.
Yes. The soul makes that breathtaking synthesis possible. It's not cold data mining, it is a profound alchemy. Without the soul functioning as that temporary masterpiece of adaptation, the physical world would be useless to the spirit.
And the spirit would be completely blind to the physical world.
Exactly. The scarab is doing the heavy lifting so the sphere can shine. It's an essential partnership.
Okay, that makes sense. But since the soul is a temporary piece of technology built specifically to interface with the physical world, what happens when the physical journey ends?
You mean at the moment of death?
Right. What does the unplugging process look like when the body dies?
According to this text, death marks the detachment of the spirit from that earthly experience. But it is not a sudden, violent severance. You don't just instantly vanish into the ether.
So it's a process.
Yes. Immediately after death, the spirit enters a transitional phase called trascendimento.
Trascendimento. That translates roughly to a dreamlike state, right?
It does. In this state, the boundaries between the heavy physical world you just left and the pure energetic reality you are entering are not immediately clear.
They overlap.
They overlap significantly. The spirit still perceives having a psyche. It still feels earthly, affective recognitions, the emotional tethers to people you loved, places you lived, and symbols you identified with.
I read the word psychism in the notes regarding this phase. What exactly is a psychism?
Think of psychism as the psychological momentum of being human.
Like a habit.
Sort of. If you spend 80 years strongly identifying as, say, John the architect, who is fiercely protective of his family, that identity has immense psychological weight. When the body dies, the spirit doesn't just instantly drop John the architect.
Like, 'cause it's so used to being him.
Exactly. That psychism, that mental habit of being John, lingers in the trasognomento state.
It sounds exactly like waking up from a hyper-realistic, emotionally intense dream.
That's a perfect analogy.
Like, you know those mornings where you wake up and your heart is pounding because you were arguing with someone in a nightmare? For those first few minutes lying in bed, you are fully awake, but you still feel the lingering anger or the panic.
Yes, you're still emotionally tethered to the logic of the dream.
But as you throw off the covers, splash water on your face and start making coffee, the dream elements contract. You realize the argument wasn't real. The emotions fade and become insignificant to your waking reality, even if the lesson of the dream stays with you.
The waking dream is a brilliant way to conceptualize the transition. Your earthly life, with all its deep attachments and historical dramas, was the immersive dream.
And in Trasognomento, you're just starting to splash water on your face.
Right. In Trasognomento, the spirit is waking up to its true, pure, energetic reality. It's looking back at the earthly ties through a fog. It feels a profound sense of abandonment and detachment from the physical world it was just immersed in.
That sounds kind of sad, honestly.
It can seem that way from our perspective, but the text emphasizes that this detachment is fundamentally painless. The soul, the translator that made the dream feel so incredibly real, is beginning to dissolve because its specific function is simply no longer required.
But surely that waking up process takes different amounts of time for different people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I have a nightmare about moving a flight, I forget it in 5 minutes. If I have a dream about losing a loved one, it shakes me for the entire day.
That's very true.
Does the Trasognomento phase have a set duration? Like, is it 3 weeks for everybody?
The sources are definitive on this. There is absolutely no universal timeline. You cannot measure this transition in earthly days, months, or years.
Okay, so what determines it?
It is a ticking clock, but the speed of the clock depends entirely on earthly factors. Specifically, it depends on the psychological weight of the life you just lived.
So what makes the clock tick slower? What keeps the spirit lingering in the dream?
The intensity of your earthly relationships, the lifestyle you lived. But most importantly, it depends on how heavily tied you were to the contractual, historical, and symbolic elements of earthly life.
Contractual elements? Like what?
If your entire sense of self is wrapped up in material definitions of success, or old grudges, or rigid historical identities, those elements persist long after death.
Because they're heavy.
Extremely heavy. The spirit takes much longer to untangle from them because the soul's translator is clogged with all that dense quantitative attachment.
And if you aren't as attached?
Conversely, the less inextricably attached a person is, the more rapidly the spirit emancipates from its psychism. The soul's elements contract and fade swiftly, leaving only the essential qualitative essence the spirit needs to move forward.
I have to play devil's advocate here, because if I'm a listener trying to apply this to my life right now, I might think, well, if I want a quick, easy transition when I die, I should just live a completely detached, cold life.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, like I shouldn't fall in love, I shouldn't care about my career, I shouldn't build a family, just so I don't accumulate any of this psychological weight.
That is the most common pitfall when discussing philosophical detachment. It is absolutely not about avoiding love, passion, or human experience.
Because then what's the point of living?
Exactly. Remember the core premise we talked about earlier. Gathering experience and feeling the friction of the earthly realm is the entire point of the spirit incarnating.
Right, if you don't experience anything, the glass scarab has no raw sunlight to capture and focus, the spirit learns nothing.
Precisely. The text is advocating for conscious detachment, which is very different from avoidance.
How so?
It is about experiencing the absolute depth of the world without becoming hopelessly chained to your material identity or your ego. There is a massive difference between loving your family deeply while recognizing the eternal qualitative nature of that bond versus clinging to them out of possessive fear.
Like defining your entire existence by your physical proximity to them. It's kind of like going for a long hike in the dead of winter. You absolutely need to wear a heavy, insulated coat to survive the cold and experience the mountain.
Right.
But conscious detachment is knowing that the coat isn't you. When you finally get back inside to the warmth, you don't refuse to take the coat off just because it kept you safe outside. You just let it drop to the floor.
That's a beautiful analogy, and the reality is many people refuse to take the coat off.
Because they think they are the coat.
Exactly. Think about the listener's daily life. If you define your core worth entirely by your job title, your bank account balance, or a specific grievance someone committed against you 10 years ago, those are heavy, quantitative, contractual weights.
But just extra coats you're wearing inside the house.
Yes, preparing for this natural change in perspective means practicing the art of wearing the coat loosely while you're still walking the trail.
Okay, so eventually, whether it happens swiftly because you wore the coat loosely, or it takes a long time because you clung to it, the earthly fog completely clears. The transcendimento ends.
Yes, it always ends eventually.
The spirit is emancipated, and the soul's translation work is done. What happens next? I mean, the spirit is all this focused light, this translated data from its earthly life. How does it judge what it just went through?
This brings us to the final phase, the ultimate self-review. The source material outlines a highly specific framework for this ethical judgment. First, it reiterates that, just like the detachment, this post-death review is entirely painless, with one notable exception.
Wait, what causes the exception?
If the spirit caused significant pain on Earth and leaves behind unresolved situations, it can experience what the text calls a travail, or an intense inner struggle.
Oh, like a workplace.
Deeper than that. It possesses a sudden, crystal-clear desire to fix the damage it caused, but faces the stark, unchangeable reality that it no longer has a physical form. It cannot reach back into the quantitative world to intervene.
Wow, that realization sounds incredibly heavy.
It is, but the text also clarifies that this self-judgment isn't based on human morals, which is a really fascinating distinction.
Really? So it's not judging itself based on, like, the laws of the society it lived in?
No, it is crucial to separate the two. Human morals are part of that evolutionary grammar we discussed at the beginning.
Right, the historical survival stuff.
Exactly. They fluctuate wildly based on culture, geography, and historical era. What was moral 500 years ago might be considered abhorrent today. The spirit's judgment ignores all of that.
So what is it based on?
It is highly objective and based on a universal ethical reality. It evaluates the qualitative intention behind the actions, not the societal rules they broke or followed.
And the mechanism the spirit uses to judge itself is incredibly precise.
Yeah.
The text points out that the spirit makes a strict separation between what it was truly responsible for as a spiritual being versus what it simply could not avoid due to the physical limitations of the human body and mind.
Consider the implications of that for a moment. The spirit looks at a moment of profound anger or failure in its earthly life and objectively sorts the data.
Sorting the quantitative from the qualitative.
Yes. It sees clearly where the physical brain's chemistry, or a hormonal imbalance, or deeply ingrained biological survival instincts overrode spiritual intention.
It honestly reminds me of investigators recovering an airplane's black box after a really rough, turbulent flight.
Okay, I like this. Go on.
And imagine that black box is being reviewed by a perfectly fair, omniscient judge. The judge looks at the flight data and knows exactly which parts of the rough landing were due to the pilot's conscious, poor decisions. That represents the spirit's intentionality.
Right.
But the judge also sees exactly which parts of the turbulence happened because the plane's engine was faulty by design, or because there was a mechanical failure in the wings that the pilot couldn't control. That represents the biological limitations of the physical body.
That is exactly how the text describes it. And because that judge, the spirit itself, can perfectly separate the pilot's intention from the plane's mechanical flaws, the ultimate judgment isn't punitive.
It's not about punishing the pilot.
No, it's not a cosmic ledger of punishments designed to make the spirit suffer. It is an objective sorting of data.
Which leads directly to an evolutionary upgrade.
Precisely. Through this exact, clear-eyed judgment, the spirit re-elaborates its entire evolution. By integrating the concentrated light that the scarab translated for it, the spirit finds itself with an improved heritage.
Like it leveled up.
Yes, it reaches a richer, more complex energetic state than it possessed before it incarnated. And from that upgraded state, it decides its next movements in the universe, guided by laws that the text notes are currently far beyond human comprehension.
Man, we have covered massive ground today. We started by dismantling the assumption that your mind and your soul are your ultimate identity.
A huge paradigm shift right there.
Yeah. Instead, we explored the reality of the language barrier between quantitative earthly mechanics and qualitative spiritual energy. We watched the soul act as that brilliant, translucent glass scarab, a transducer translating the heavy friction of life into pure spiritual data.
The alchemy of existence.
Exactly. We navigated the waking dream of trasonamento, understanding that how quickly we wake up depends on how tightly we cling to our human avatars. And finally, we looked at the ultimate black box review, where the spirit fairly separates its true intentions from the mechanical flaws of its earthly spacesuit to achieve an evolutionary upgrade.
It is a profound, paradigm-shifting way to view your existence.
It really is.
And if we want to extract the ultimate practical value from this deep dive, it leaves you with an immediate reflection for your daily life.
Yeah, what's the takeaway for the listener right now?
Well, if the speed of your spirit's ultimate emancipation, your ability to wake up from the dream, depends on how tightly you cling to your earthly identity right now, take a look around your life today.
What weights are you carrying?
Exactly. Ask yourself, what contractual or symbolic elements of your identity are you holding on to so fiercely? Your titles, your old grievances, your rigid definitions of what makes you successful?
The heavy winter coats.
Yes. Which of those earthly weights might be dragging down your scarab when it's time to fly? You don't have to suddenly drop all your worldly attachments today, but simply noticing them, recognizing that they are just a heavy coat you are temporarily wearing to brave the cold.
That awareness changes everything.
It does. That might be the very first step in learning to speak the true qualitative language of your spirit.